The Billionaire in Rags, The Secret of Table 9. Part 1. The 50 cents tip that changed everything. The bell above the door of the Rusty Anchor Diner didn't just ring, it wheezed. It was 5:45 a.m. The sky was the color of a bruised plum, and Alara was already on her third pot of decaf. She didn't do it for the money. If she were doing it for the money, she would have quit months ago when the landlord threatened to change the locks on her studio apartment. She did it for the early birds, the lonely souls who had nowhere else to go. And then, there was Mr. Clarence. He shuffled in every morning at 5:50 a.m. sharp. He wore a coat that had seen more winters than Alara had been alive. And his shoes were held together by a prayer and a bit of silver duct tape. He always sat at table 9, the one with the wobbly leg, and ordered the same thing: one slice of dry toast and a cup of hot water with a slice of lemon. Total cost? $1.50. Morning, sunshine, Clarence would rasp, his eyes twinkling behind glasses so thick they looked like the bottom of soda bottles. Morning, Clarence, Alara would smile, already sliding a plate of buttered pancakes and a side of crispy bacon in front of him. The chef, accidentally, made an extra order. It's going to the trash if you don't eat it. Clarence knew. Alara knew. The chef didn't even know. Alara paid for those pancakes out of her own meager tips every single day. She watched him eat with a dignity that didn't match his clothes. He would leave exactly 2 quarters on the table, a 33% tip on his $1.50 bill, and walk out into the cold. But today, the routine was about to be shattered by a man in a $3 suit. Part 2. The Man Who Forgot Where He Came From. The silence of the morning was punctured by the roar of an engine that cost more than the entire diner. A sleek, black Italian sports car screeched to a halt outside. A man stepped out. He looked like he had been carved out of granite and ego. He didn't walk, he marched. When he pushed open the door, he didn't wait for the wheeze, he slammed it against the wall. "Dad, get up, we're leaving, now," the man barked. The entire diner went silent. The construction workers at the counter froze with forks halfway to their mouths. Clarence didn't look up from his pancake. He slowly chewed, swallowed, and dabbed his mouth with a paper napkin. "I'm finishing my breakfast, Julian," Clarence said quietly. Julian, the son, let out a laugh that sounded like breaking glass. He turned to the room, his eyes landing on Alara, who was standing frozen with a coffee pot in her hand. "Breakfast? Is that what you call this slop?" Julian sneered, walking over to table 9. He looked at Alara with pure, unadulterated disgust. "And you're the one, aren't you? The little charity worker my father keeps rambling about in his letters." Alara found her voice. "I'm his waitress, sir, and he's a valued customer." "Valued customer?" Julian laughed, reaching into his pocket and pulling out a wad of $100 bills. He tossed one onto the sticky table. "Here, that's more than you'll make in a month. Stop feeding him. You're not helping a poor old man, you're enabling a delusional one. Do you even know who he is? Or are you just hoping he'll leave you his collection of bottle caps in his will?" Part 3. The Humiliation at Table 9. Julian leaned down, his face inches from Alara's. He smelled of expensive cologne and coldness. "Look at this place." Julian gestured to the peeling wallpaper and the grease-stained menus. "It's a tomb for losers. And you're the queen of them. My father was once a giant. Now he sits here with people like you, eating accidental pancakes like a stray dog. It's pathetic. You're pathetic." Clarence's hand trembled slightly as he set down his fork. "Julian, that is enough." "No, it's not enough," Julian screamed, turning back to his father. "I've spent 3 years building the empire you handed over. I've tripled the profits. And I find out you're spending your mornings in a dump, being mothered by a girl who probably can't spell the word investment. It's an embarrassment to the family name." He grabbed the plate of pancakes, the ones Alara had paid for with her last $5, and flipped it onto the floor. "If he wants to eat like a dog, let him eat off the floor." Julian spat. Alara's eyes stung with tears. Not for herself, but for the broken look on Clarence's face. She didn't stay quiet. Money doesn't give you the right to be a monster, she whispered. Julian stepped toward her, his shadow looming over her. What did you say, sweetheart? I said. Alara looked him dead in the eye. That your father is 10 times the man you are. Even in those rags. Now, get out of my diner before I call the police. Julian laughed. A dark, dangerous sound. Your diner? Honey, look at the sign. It's a rental. And guess what? I just bought the block. Part 4. The Cliffhanger. The room went cold. Clarence finally stood up. He didn't look frail anymore. He looked weary. You bought the block, Julian? Clarence asked. Yesterday. Julian smirked. And the first thing I'm doing is bulldozing this eyesore. You'll have to find a new place to play poor man. Dad, and this girl? She'll be looking for a job in a soup kitchen by noon. Clarence sighed and reached into the inner pocket of his tattered coat. He didn't pull out a wallet. He pulled out a small, encrypted black tablet. I was hoping it wouldn't come to this. Julian, Clarence said, his voice dropping an octave into a tone of absolute authority. I wanted to see if there was a shred of your mother's heart left in you. I gave you the company to see if you could handle the power. But you forgot the most important rule of the game. Julian blinked, his bravado flickering for a split second. What are you talking about? Clarence tapped a command on the screen. You didn't buy the block. Julian, you signed a letter of intent with a holding company called Aegis North. Do you know who owns Aegis North? Julian's face went pale. That's a private equity firm. No one knows the board. I do, Clarence said, looking at Alara with a sad smile. Because I am the board. Part 5. The 90-day invisibility test. Julian's phone chimed in his pocket, a sharp, frantic notification. He pulled it out, his thumb trembling as he swiped. His face went from pale to a ghostly, translucent white. The merger, Julian whispered, his voice cracking. It's been frozen, by the majority shareholder. That would be me, Clarence said, his posture straightening. The frail old man who needed help with his coat was gone. In his place stood a man who looked like he could move mountains with a whisper. Sit down, Julian. You're making a scene in Alara's diner. Your diner? Alara stammered, still holding the coffee pot. Clarence looked at her, his eyes softening. Not yet, Alara, but we'll get to that. You see, Julian, 90 days ago, I walked out of the corporate headquarters with nothing but the clothes on my back and a bank account with exactly $50 in it. I wanted to see if the world was as cold as you claimed it was. You told me that people are only kind when there's a profit margin. I wanted to prove you wrong. Julian let out a desperate, shaky laugh. So what? You played dress up? You lived like a cockroach to prove a point? That's senile, Dad. That's insane. No, Clarence replied calmly. It was a filter. For 3 months, I visited every business we own in this state. I sat in our lobbies. I ate in our cafeterias. And I walked through our stores. Most people looked through me. Some laughed. A few called security. But then, I came here. He gestured to the floor where the ruined pancakes lay. This young woman didn't see a cockroach. She saw a human being. She spent her own rent money to feed a man she thought had nothing. She protected my dignity when you, my own blood, tried to strip it away. Part 6. The Contract of Consequence. The diner was so quiet you could hear the hum of the refrigerator in the back. The regulars, the truck drivers and the night shift nurses, were leaning in, watching the most powerful man they'd never heard of dismantle his son. Julian tried to pivot. He forced a smile, though it looked more like a grimace. Okay, you caught me. It was a lesson. I get it. Ha ha. Look, Alara, right? I'm sorry about the floor thing. Here. He reached into his wallet and pulled out a stack of bills, throwing them toward her. Consider that a tip. Now, Dad, let's get in the car. We have the board meeting at 10. Clarence didn't move. He looked at the money on the floor, then back at his son. There won't be a board meeting for you, Julian, Clarence said. I didn't just freeze the merger. I initiated the moral turpitude clause in your contract. You remember that one? The one your lawyers said was unnecessary. Julian's eyes went wide. You wouldn't. That strips my shares. That leaves me with nothing. It leaves you with exactly what I had 90 days ago, Clarence said. $50 and the clothes on your back. You wanted to own this block? Well, now you're just a pedestrian on it. Julian's face twisted into a mask of rage. He looked at Alara, the source of his humiliation. This is your fault. You and your stupid, accidental pancakes. You ruined everything. He stepped toward Alara, his hand raised in a moment of pure, blind fury. The diner regulars started to stand up, but they weren't fast enough. Julian swung, not a punch, but a violent shove intended to send her crashing into the counter. But Alara didn't fall. A hand caught Julian's wrist midair with the force of a vice grip. It was the quiet cook from the kitchen, a man named Marcus who rarely spoke. He squeezed Julian's wrist until the younger man cried out. The lady told you to leave, Marcus said in a low rumble. Get your hands off me. Julian screamed. He scrambled backward, tripping over the very chair his father had occupied for months. He scrambled to his feet, gasping for air, looking at the circle of people, waitresses, cooks, and blue-collar workers, who were now closing in. This isn't over, Julian shouted, backed against the door. I'll sue. I'll burn this place down. You'll do nothing, Clarence said, stepping forward, because as of 5 minutes ago, Alara isn't just a waitress anymore. Part 7. The Cliffhanger, Sneak Peek. Julian froze, his hand on the door handle. What? Clarence turned to Alara, who was trembling, her mind racing. Alara, I've watched you manage this chaos for months. I've seen your books. I know you're the one keeping the inventory straight because the owner is too lazy to do it. You have the heart of a leader and the soul of a saint. Clarence looked back at his son, then at the room. I didn't just buy the block to save the diner, Clarence announced. I bought it to give it to the only person who knows what it's actually worth. Alara's breath hitched. Mr. Clarence, I can't. I don't know how to run a block. You won't have to do it alone. Clarence smiled. But first, we have a much bigger problem. Julian, check your phone one last time. There's a reason the police are pulling into the parking lot right now. Part 7. The Blue Lights and the Paper Trail. The rhythmic flash of red and blue strobed against the diner's frosted windows. Julian's bravado vanished, replaced by a frantic, trapped animal look. The police? Julian's voice was a high-pitched squeak. You called the cops because I pushed a waitress? You're going to ruin my reputation over a scuffle in a greasy spoon? Clarence stood his ground, his silhouette framed by the flashing lights outside. I didn't call them for the scuffle. Julian, I called them because while I was sitting here eating slop and being pathetic, I had a team of forensic auditors digging through the Aegis North server. They found the offshore accounts. They found the shell companies you used to siphon $30 million from the employee pension fund. The diner went deathly quiet. Even the sound of the sizzling grill seemed to stop. The blue-collar workers, the very people whose futures Julian had been stealing, began to stand up from their stools. You stole from the pension fund, the cook? Marcus asked, his voice low and dangerous. It was a temporary loan. Julian stammered, backing into the glass door. I was going to put it back after the merger. It's how business works. It's how your business works. Clarence corrected, but the merger is dead. The accounts are frozen, and the detectives outside are here to discuss the temporary loan that funded your sports car and your penthouse. The door swung open. 2 officers entered, their boots clicking on the checkered tile. Julian didn't even fight. He looked like a man whose soul had been sucked out. As they clicked the handcuffs into place, he looked at his father with pure hatred. You'd send your own son to prison for a waitress? Julian hissed. No, Clarence said sadly. I'm sending a thief to prison to protect 10,000 families. The fact that you think this is about a waitress is exactly why you were never fit to lead. Part 8. The Key to the Kingdom. As the police cruiser pulled away, taking Julian into the gray morning, a heavy silence settled over the rusty anchor. Alara felt dizzy. She leaned against the counter, her hands still trembling. Clarence walked over to her. He didn't look like a billionaire now, he just looked like the kind man from table 9. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a heavy, old-fashioned brass key. Alara, he said softly, the owner of this building, Mr. Henderson, has been looking for an exit strategy for years. He's tired. He's let this place fall apart. This morning, at 4 a.m., my lawyers finalized the purchase of the entire building, the business, and the 2 vacant lots next door. He placed the key on the counter. I'm not a restaurant manager. I'm an investor, and I only invest in things with high growth potential. Clarence winked. You have 6 months of back pay coming to you for the meals you bought me. But more importantly, you have a decision to make. What? What kind of decision? Alara whispered. This diner stays open, Clarence said firmly, but it needs a soul. It needs someone who knows that a cup of coffee is sometimes the only thing keeping a person's world together. I'm the owner on paper. But I want you to be the operating partner. You take 51% of the profits. You hire the staff. You choose the menu. You turn this tomb for losers into a sanctuary for the neighborhood. Alara looked at the brass key. It looked like a weapon and a gift all at once. I don't have the money to buy into a partnership. Clarence, I can't even pay my rent this Friday. Your rent is already paid. Clarence smiled. Consider it a signing bonus. The question is, are you ready to stop serving the story and start writing it? Alara looked around the room. She saw Marcus in the kitchen, a man who had protected her. She saw the early birds who relied on this place. Then she looked at the spot on the floor where Julian had tried to humiliate her. She picked up the key. I have one condition, Alara said, her voice finally steady. Anything, Clarence replied. We keep table 9 exactly the way it is, wobbly leg and all. Part 9, The Transformation of Table 9. 3 months passed like a whirlwind. The rusty anchor was no longer the peeling, grease-covered relic it once was. It had been reborn as the beacon. The neon sign outside didn't buzz anymore, it glowed with a warm, inviting amber light. Inside, the wobbly tables had been replaced with polished oak, and the smell of burnt decaf had been replaced by the aroma of artisanal beans and fresh-baked brioche. But in the corner, near the window where the morning sun hit first, sat table 9. It was still the same scratched laminate, still had the slightly shorter left leg, and it still had a reserved sign on it every morning until 6 a.m. Alara stood behind the counter, no longer in a stained apron, but in a sharp charcoal vest. She was the boss, but she still pulled the first espresso of the day herself. Marcus, how are those seasonal omelets coming? She called out. Ahead of schedule, boss, Marcus grunted from the kitchen. He had been promoted to head chef, with a salary that actually allowed him to put his daughter through college. The early birds were all there. The construction workers now had high-visibility vests that said Aegis Construction. Clarence had ensured they were the first hired for the new block redevelopment. They didn't just have breakfast, they had a community. At 5:50 a.m., the door wheezed, a sound Alara had insisted on keeping, and Clarence walked in. He wasn't wearing the rags anymore. He wore a simple, well-tailored wool coat. He sat at table 9. The usual, Clarence? Alara asked, sliding a plate of accidental pancakes in front of him. You know, Alara, Clarence smiled, looking around the bustling room. This is the best ROI I've seen in 40 years. But you should know, Julian's trial starts tomorrow. His lawyers are playing the mental breakdown card. They're trying to say I coerced him into the embezzlement. Alara wiped the counter, her expression hardening. He can say what he wants. The numbers don't lie, and neither do the people he stepped on. Part 10. The Ghost in the Rain. The evening of the grand reopening was supposed to be a celebration. The local news had covered the story of the waitress who won the block, and the line for a table stretched around the corner. Clarence was there, sitting quietly in the back, watching Alara command the room with a grace she never knew she possessed. But as the clock struck 10 p.m. and the rain began to lash against the windows, A figure appeared at the glass door. He didn't look like the man in the $3 suit anymore. Julian was thin, his hair matted with rain, wearing a cheap windbreaker that was soaked through. He wasn't escorted by police, he was alone. Somehow, he had been granted bail. Or perhaps he had escaped the watchful eyes of his legal team. He didn't come in, he just stood there, staring through the glass at Alara. The room went quiet. Marcus stepped out of the kitchen, his hand tightening around a dish towel. The construction workers stood up. The atmosphere shifted from celebration to a cold, jagged tension. Alara signaled for everyone to stay back. She walked to the door and pushed it open. The cold wind whipped into the warm diner. "You shouldn't be here, Julian," she said quietly. "I have nothing," Julian whispered. His voice was stripped of its arrogance, replaced by a hollow, haunting vibration. "They took the penthouse, the cars, my friends, they don't even pick up the phone. I'm the pension thief. I can't even buy a sandwich without someone spitting on me." "You did that to yourself," Alara replied. "I did." He nodded slowly. "But I didn't come here to beg for the company back. I know that's gone. I came because of the letters." Alara frowned. "What letters?" Julian pulled a crumpled, yellowed envelope from his pocket. It wasn't an official Aegis document. It was a handwritten letter from 10 years ago. My mother's last will. The private one. The one my father hid from me. The one that says this block wasn't just a piece of real estate. It was a trust. He looked at Clarence, who had risen from his seat and was walking slowly toward the door. His face unreadable. "You told her I wasn't ready," Julian said to his father, his voice breaking. "You told her I was a monster even when I was 20. You didn't give me the company to lead. Dad, you gave it to me to see me fail. Didn't you? You set the trap 10 years ago." Clarence stopped 3 feet from the door. "I gave you a choice, Julian, every day for 10 years. You had the choice to be kind. You chose greed every single time." "Maybe," Julian said, a strange, dark smile touching his lips. "But there's one thing you forgot. Dad, if I'm a monster, who raised me?" Julian reached into his jacket. The diners gasped, some ducked under tables. But he didn't pull out a weapon. He pulled out a small, old-fashioned music box, the same one Alara had seen in a photo on Clarence's tablet. "The trust doesn't belong to Alara," Julian said, his eyes locking onto Alara's. "And it doesn't belong to me. Check the deed again, Dad. Check the name of the successor of interest your wife named. It's not a person, it's a bloodline." Julian looked at Alara, a terrifying realization dawning in his eyes. "Tell me, Alara, what was your mother's maiden name?" Part 11. The Secret in the Name. The rain drummed against the pavement like 1,000 frantic heartbeats. Alara felt the air leave her lungs. The music box in Julian's hand played a thin, tinkling melody, a lullaby she hadn't heard in 20 years, yet one her soul recognized instantly. "My mother's name?" Alara's voice was barely a whisper. "She was Sarah Miller. She passed away when I was 7. I grew up in the state system." Julian's laughter was dry and hollow. He looked at Clarence, whose face had turned a shade of gray that matched the storm. "Sarah Miller," Julian repeated, mocking the simplicity. "Tell her, Dad. Tell her who Sarah Miller really was. Tell her why you have a Sarah Miller scholarship at the university. Tell her why you spent $10 million searching for a child in the foster system 15 years ago and then suddenly stopped." Clarence stepped toward Alara, his hands shaking. The billionaire in rags was finally broken. "I didn't stop because I gave up, Julian. I stopped because I was told the child didn't survive the fire at the group home. I thought I had lost everything." He turned to Alara, tears welling in his eyes. "Sarah was my sister, my younger, rebellious sister who walked away from the family fortune because she couldn't stand the coldness of our father. She wanted a life of meaning, not a life of margins. She changed her name. She disappeared." The diner was frozen. The regulars looked from the powerful old man to the young woman behind the counter. The resemblance, usually hidden by the exhaustion of a double shift, was suddenly undeniable, the same stubborn jaw, The same light in the eyes that valued people over paper. You're not just a good person, Alara, Julian sneered, stepping into the diner, dripping water onto the pristine floor. You're the primary heir, according to the trust my mother set up. If Sarah's line was found, the majority share of the Aegis holdings, the block, the company, the pension funds, all of it reverts to you. My father was just the caretaker. And I was just the distraction. Part 12. The Devil's Bargain. Julian walked to table 9 and sat down. He looked like a king on a throne made of wreckage. But here's the problem, Alara, Julian said, his eyes gleaming with a final, desperate play. The trust has a unity clause. To activate the transfer, the family must be in agreement. If I contest your identity, if I tie this up in court for the next 20 years, you'll never see a dime. This diner will be seized as a disputed asset. Clarence will go to a state-run nursing home while the lawyers bleed the accounts dry. He leaned forward, the music box still playing that haunting tune. Or, Julian whispered, we make a deal. You use your new power to drop the embezzlement charges. You tell the DA it was a misunderstanding or an internal accounting error. You give me back my seat on the board. In exchange, I sign the papers tonight. You get the block. You get the billions. You save the early birds and their precious pensions. Clarence took a step forward, his voice booming. Don't listen to him, Alara. He's a drowning man trying to pull you under. Let the company fall. We will survive. Will you? Julian challenged. Look at them, Alara. He gestured to the construction workers and the nurses. If the company goes into receivership during a court battle, their pensions are gone tomorrow. The bank will foreclose on this building in 30 days. You can be the rightful heir of a graveyard. Or you can be a billionaire with a brother who has a few flaws. Alara looked at the brass key on the counter. She looked at the faces of the people who had become her family. She saw the fear in Marcus's eyes, the fear of a man who might lose his daughter's tuition. She looked at Julian, the man who had tried to humiliate her, who had stolen from the poor, and who was now offering her the world in exchange for his soul. You want me to lie for you, Alara said. I want you to be a businesswoman. Julian corrected. Choose, Alara, the truth and poverty for everyone you love, or a lie and a kingdom. Alara slowly picked up the heavy brass key. She didn't look at Julian. She didn't look at Clarence. She walked to the front door and opened it wide. Julian, she said, her voice like cold steel. You forgot one thing about my mother. She didn't leave the family because she was rebellious. She left because she knew that some things are too expensive to buy with money. Part 13, The Third Way. Julian stood up from table 9, a smug grin spreading across his face. He reached into his wet jacket for a pen. I knew you were smart. Alara, sign the affidavit saying the embezzlement was an internal error. And I'll sign the trust transfer. We both win. Alara didn't take the pen. She looked at the brass key in her hand. Then at the early birds standing in the shadows. I'm not signing your lie, Julian, Alara said firmly. Julian's grin faltered. Then you lose everything. The diner, the pensions. You're sentencing these people to poverty just to keep your conscience clean? That's not being a hero, Alara. That's being selfish. I'm not signing your lie, Alara repeated, her voice gaining strength. But I've been reading the fine print of the block's ownership ever since Clarence gave me the key. You see, Julian, you think in terms of owning or losing. But you forgot about the community. She turned to the regulars. Everyone here, Marcus, the nurses, the drivers, they aren't just customers. They are the heartbeat of this city. And because Clarence already transferred the deed of this building and the adjacent lots to me personally as a gift, before you revealed the trust, I don't need the billions to save the diner. Julian laughed harshly. The diner? Who cares about a sandwich shop? I'm talking about the Aegis Empire. Without my signature on the trust, the company will be dismantled by the state to pay for your integrity. Not exactly, Clarence intervened, a spark of pride returning to his eyes. You see, Julian, while you were focused on the unity clause, you forgot about the fiduciary forfeiture. A trustee loses all rights to contest a transfer if they are convicted of a felony against the company's interests. Julian's face went slack. I haven't been convicted yet. No, Alara said, holding up her phone. But you just stood in a room full of witnesses and attempted to bribe a government witness to suppress evidence of a $30 million theft. And because this diner is now equipped with the high-definition security system Clarence insisted on. She pointed to a small, blinking red light in the corner of the ceiling. You didn't just confess to the embezzlement. Alara said. You just committed a new felony. Obstruction of justice and witness tampering. On camera. Part 14. The Legacy of Table 9. Julian looked up at the camera. Then at the silent, stone-faced crowd. The music box in his hand ran out of tension. The lullaby dying with a final, discordant note. He didn't scream. He didn't fight. He simply sat back down at Table 9 and buried his face in his hands as the sirens returned. Louder and more final than before. 1 year later. The Beacon was no longer just a diner. It was the headquarters for the Sarah Miller Foundation. The Aegis Empire had been restructured, not as a cold corporate machine, but as a worker-owned conglomerate. Alara had refused the billionaire title, choosing instead to live in a modest apartment above the diner and drawing only a manager's salary. The rest of the billions? They went into the pension funds she had saved and into building high-quality housing for the city's invisible workers. It was 5:50 a.m. The sky was that familiar bruised plum. The bell above the door wheezed. Clarence walked in. He looked younger, healthier. He wore a simple flannel shirt. He sat at Table 9. Morning, Clarence. Alara smiled, sliding a plate of pancakes in front of him. Morning, boss, he replied, his eyes twinkling. I hear the foundation just opened its 10th community kitchen. Not a bad ROI for a slice of toast and hot water. It's amazing what happens when you treat people like they matter, Alara said, leaning against the counter. Just then, the door wheezed again. A young woman walked in, looking tired, wearing a tattered coat and shoes held together with tape. She looked at the menu with eyes that counted every penny. Alara didn't wait for her to sit. She grabbed a fresh mug of coffee and a warm muffin. Morning, sunshine, Alara said, walking over to the newcomer. The chef accidentally made an extra order. It's going to the trash if you don't eat it. The young woman looked up, her eyes filling with a sudden, overwhelming hope. She sat at the table next to Clarence. The cycle of kindness had begun again, and at Table 9, the world felt exactly as it should be.